Welcome to Up Close and Personal. I'm Scott Sexsmith. A very exciting episode today. I'm thrilled to welcome the former chief anchor and senior editor of the CTV National News, Lloyd Robertson. Lloyd, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be here and great to be visiting Sault Ste. Marie again.
Absolutely. Now, you've got some ties to the Sioux. Your half-brother was the police chief here.
Irvin L. Robertson, yes. He was the chief from 1942 for 22 years. One of the longest serving chiefs of all time, I think. And he told me all interesting stories about that period because it was, of course, during the Second World War. And they were concerned in the Sioux about Nazi Germany making them a target because of the shipping lanes and the locks and all of that. So they set up a joint task force, 1942-1943, with the Americans, to be sure that everything was protected there. And he also told me about the fact that in 1942-43, the first submarine, HMCS Sault Ste. Marie, was launched from there, and it went on to become a convoy in the Battle of the Atlantic. So quite a famous time for him to be chief. And he knew that, that would be challenging going there at that time. And then following the war, large immigration in the Sioux, coming into the Sioux, and the Italian population grew exponentially during that period. So it was a very interesting time for him, and he and I talked a lot about that. He was my half-brother, but he was really like a second father to me because I was, as they say, the last of the litter of a second family. My father's first wife died, and then I was one of two from the second family. Irvin was from the first family, and he was the one who really took an interest in me and helped me along in my career path as I was growing up and going from radio station to radio station. He followed me. And then when I joined the CBC and I was on the network, he would call relatives around the country and say, "Lloyd's on." And they'd hang up the phone just to be sure that everybody was watching when I appeared on national television. A great guy. I love it.
Terrific story, Lloyd. Now, there's lots that I'd like to cover today, starting with your amazing career that has spanned over 6 decades, that started in 1952 in your hometown of Stratford at CJCS Radio, followed by a couple of years at CJoy in Guelph. What do you remember about your radio days and your time in Stratford?
Well, I first remember being absolutely thrilled when I was hired after school on Saturday for a job at the local radio station, CJCS. And I was an operator on board, on the big soundboard at the time, for the other announcers. And I'd come in at 4 o'clock and I'd do a run from 4 until 6. And then on Saturdays, I would occasionally get to announce a program. And one of the announcers there, a fellow by the name of Norm Jerry from Guelph, he offered me one of his shows. He had a lot of them. And he said, "Listen, kid, you may as well get your start. Do this thing called Musical Personality Time." Very original title, of course. And it was on every Saturday morning from 11:30 until 12. And we would pick one of the major band leaders at the time and play his music. Betty Goodman, Artie Shaw, so on, Tommy Dorsey. And that was my first real show on the radio when I was still after school on Saturday. Then when I finished school, I got lucky because 2 announcers from the station left around the same time. And they thought, I guess the kid has some promise, so we'll give him a chance. So they hired me as a full-time announcer, and I did the morning show, Rise and Shine, 6 until 9. I did a noon run called Suggestions of Music. The suggestions were commercials for the most part, and the music was very limited during that time because we had the major newscast of the day. And then I came back in the evening, and I did Uncle Lloyd's Birthday Club at 5 o'clock. And I did the evening news at 6:30. So it was a pretty full day. And you know what? I would have done that all over again. I enjoyed every minute of it. I worked all those long hours every day, but I loved it because I was one of those lucky people who happened to fall into what I love to do. And I got interested in radio years before that. At the end of the Second World War, I remember clustering with my friends around a platform in Stratford, at the corner of Downey and Waterloo Streets. And we were there watching the boys march home, the 3rd Regiment, from the Second World War. the returning parade. This was 1946 and January. And I can recall to this day listening to those broadcasters on the platform just above us and thinking, wow, what a wonderful job. Because when you're in broadcasting, you can be right at the center of things. And that's, of course, where I wanted to be. And I got there, and I've had a wonderful, wonderful career.
You certainly have. Your first TV job came in 1956 at CBC Winnipeg. Was it any one specific thing that prompted the switch, Lloyd, from radio to TV, or did it just kind of happen?
Well, I had been hired by the CBC in 1954 in Windsor, sorry. And in Windsor, there wasn't a lot to do. It was more or less a repeater station. And I was a little bored with my activities there. And I was thinking about moving on elsewhere. And then television was coming on stream in a big way in Canada at that time. And positions started coming up on the job board for slots here, slots there, some in Winnipeg, some in Halifax, some in Montreal, some in Toronto. I knew I wasn't ready for Toronto, so I applied for Winnipeg because I thought, if this is the coming thing, and at that time, a lot of the old radio broadcasters felt, oh, this won't last, this TV thing. Who's going to sit and watch a box in the corner all the time? That doesn't grab anybody. So as it turned out, of course, it did work, and I made that move to start in television, try it out, and that was a wonderful experience because at that time there were no schools to teach you anything. There were one or two journalism schools. I think there was one at King's College in Halifax. There was a radio school, Radio Academy in Toronto at Ryerson, but that was about it. And nobody to teach you any of the skills that you needed for a life in television. So we all learned on the job. 1956, and we just literally jumped into the deep end of the pool, and that was my beginning. And I moved on from there, from one show to another show. Eventually, I was the host of the evening news magazine show, 6 to 7, with interviews, weather, all that kind of thing. You know those type of shows.
Absolutely
they're all over the place now. And that was my main show when I got up to about 1958 in Winnipeg. And then an opportunity came along to go to Ottawa, and I grabbed that because I knew that this would give me a chance to learn a little bit more about the political scene in Ottawa, spent a lot of time around Parliament Hill. And then a few years later, I applied for and was transferred to Toronto. And when I came to Toronto, I started right at the bottom of the pile, doing overnight shifts and radio news on the hour, 2 minutes here and there, that kind of thing. Again, loving every minute of it, and moved up the ladder from there. That was in the early 60s.
And then eventually in 1970, I believe, you became the anchor of CBC's The National and rode that right through till 1976. And then if I recall the story, while covering the Montreal Olympics, you got a phone call and a lunch invite that led to what some might say is a dramatic move to cross the street and join the CTV network. Was it just time for a change, Lloyd, or was there something specific that precipitated that move?
Well, it was a very difficult period for me at the CBC at that time, because while I was doing a lot of things I really enjoyed to do, the fact is there was a jurisdictional dispute going on between the Announcers Union and the News Guild, which handled all the union activities for the news people. Now, they were the writers and reporters and this kind of thing. So when I was working on the news every night, I had no say in anything. Change a comma, maybe if I asked nicely, sure, but couldn't do anything on my own. And also, I was noticing that in America, in the United States, and all overseas also, people who fronted the news were becoming news people. That is, you had to know something about it. You know, I'd go out and go into a bar across the street from the CBC once in a while, and someone would start talking to me about the news. Oh, what do you do? How do you do with that kind of thing? And I would have to admit, well, I don't really have anything to do with the putting together of the news. I go in at 9:30 at night, do a rehearsal, and then at 11 o'clock I read it. And I could see that the business was changing. So CTV came along. They had none of those kinds of restrictions, and they made me this offer. Well, I went through a very tortuous time because I really didn't want to leave the CBC. So my heart was there for a while, even after I moved. And my mind was telling me, this is what you've got to do. You've got to make this move because this is your future. That is more involvement in news, being in the newsroom all the time, being a news person. So I made the jump, and I've never looked back since 1976. There was a brief period there, a few months in, where there was a little fluster on the weekend because CBC made a call to me to tell me about a grievance against me that had been removed by the news union. And they said, if you come back now, you'll be able to do all the things you wanted to do. And that phone call was leaked. And of course, out came a press report on the weekend saying, Lloyd's going back. Not true, of course, but it was enough to stir the pot. And I closed that down very quickly. And after that, I just said, that's it. I'm here. I'm staying. Let's go.
So the move to CTV from CBC had you now co-anchoring the national news with Harvey Kirk. There must be a huge adjustment when you go from anchoring solo to all of a sudden having a partner.
It was a very big adjustment for both of us, but we had to get used to it. And my arrangement with CTV was that I would do specials there, and I would anchor with Harvey. And every so often, I would go to the field to a big story, to a war in Ukraine, that kind of thing, or out here and there. So that was our arrangement. But we both had to get used to sharing an anchor desk. And I think we did that because we were both professionals. We'd been in the business, each of us had been in the business many years by that time. And we knew that we had to make this work. So we made it work because we became good friends. And our friendship, our professional relationship blossomed into a friendship. We became friends with Harvey and his wife. We spent weekends together sometimes. And he and I worked together for a total of 7.5 years. And then he decided that he'd done 20 years. And his health began to cause him problems at this point. He had congestive heart failure, which he died of about 10 years, I guess. Let me see, about 15 years after that, he passed. And he was a very big guy, as you know. He lived well, he enjoyed life. And I think he just felt that, 20 years was enough. So he departed. And then I was on my own. And that was in spring of 1984. And I was on my own from then until September of 2011.
Yeah, that's a long run. In fact, as part of that run, you became the longest-serving news anchor in television history, outlasting the likes of Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, and Peter Jennings. I'd say that's some pretty good company.
Yeah, the longest one on the national side.
Right.
Now, I understand that there is some guy who was anchoring a local newscast in California who lasted a little more than the 41-year span that I put in. Because I started 1970 at CBC,
right,
and ending 2011 at CTV, total 41 years. So there was somebody who anchored local news for that time, longer than I did. But we don't have to count that because that was on the local side.
Yeah, we won't even include him in the conversation. Lloyd, news anchors typically have a signature sign-off. Walter Cronkite, who anchored the CBS Evening News for almost 2 decades, would sign off with, "And that's the way it is." Here in Canada, our days always ended with yours, "And that's the kind of day it's been." Where did that come from?
Well, it came up late in the 90s when I decided I would try it, just for a little while to see how it worked. And it caught on. People began to say it back to me when I was on the street. And I thought, okay, well, maybe it's getting a little much. So I stopped doing it in the year 2000, at the turn of the century. And the next day, the chief news editor walked to me and said, Lloyd, please put the sign-off back on. I've had all kinds of calls and emails from people saying, what happened to, and that's the kind of day it's been. So I put it back in and continued on with it for the rest of my time on the desk. But it was purely by chance, just for fun.
Our guest today on Up Close and Personal is Lloyd Robertson. Lloyd, I want to talk, if we can, for a couple of minutes about the state of journalism today. It seems like people are somewhat losing faith, and in some instances there seems to be almost a hatred for journalists. We don't have to look any further, of course, than the recent events in Ottawa, the verbal abuse, being spit on. I'm curious as to your view on why this is happening, and is there a way for the media to fix this mistrust and fake news narrative?
Well, I think a lot of people, including myself, have been trying to deal with that. And it all started because of the proliferation of channels available, the news channels, and then the internet and social media. And of course, all sorts of information is flowing from all sorts of different sources every day. So now the key thing is to try to identify your source. See whether you can find a trusted source for your information. Now, a lot of people don't bother to do that. They just pick up the latest thing they've read on social media or something someone sent to them on Instagram, and they believe that's true. So it's a matter of, I suppose, to put it in an old, boring way, public education. And that's what we have to do as broadcasters and journalists. And what I say to people is, try to find what you think is a trusted source, your favorite newspaper or your favorite website, or your favorite television source, or your favorite radio source. Use those because you know then that you're getting the straight goods. And what happened in the U.S. also is that with the proliferation of cable news, when Fox came on, they decided to do something very different. They said, okay, we feel that the left of center has had a lot of play over these last many years. We're gonna play more to the people across the spectrum because we feel that certain parts of the country are not represented in the news. So they took that on as a project on their own, and it became hugely successful for them because they were providing what some people would call an alternate voice, which someone from the Trump White House described as the alternate facts. I don't know how you have alternate facts, but there you go. So that also confused the picture, muddied the waters. So we've had a lot of this muddying of the waters through the last several years. And I think all we can do is try to keep saying to people, don't believe everything you read and hear and see on your Instagram or whatever. Try to find out where that came from. I mean, right now, as we watch this Ukraine war going on, we know that the Russians have had all individual enterprises in the Soviet Union, individual journalism enterprises in the old Soviet Union in Russia, cut off from them. And they're only hearing what the state decides they are allowed to hear. And that, of course, is totally wrong and should not be allowed, but it is because it's a dictatorship. It doesn't call itself a dictatorship, but that's what it is. So that's a particular problem at the present. But, the fact is that if we can just pull back and each one of us say, let me think about this. Let me find out where I can get my information from that I can trust. And I think that's just being an individual good citizen. That's what we have to try to be.
When you see mergers, Lloyd, like the pending Rogers acquisition of Shaw that's in front of regulators currently, do you worry that we're headed down a path that leads to one voice and that journalism and storytelling will lack diversity, objectivity, and balance?
Well, that is always a danger when this kind of thing happens, no question about it. And we're always caught in that dilemma of companies saying, well, I have to be big enough to compete with the big guys. Okay, fine. But then you cut back on the diversity of voices. So for the CRTC and other broadcast regulators like the FCC in the United States, it's a matter of trying to strike a balance, not letting some of these companies get too large and allowing lots of diversity in the voices going out. So that's a challenge. I think that will continue to be a challenge.
Here at Village Media, Lloyd, our mission is to strengthen the communities that we serve, and we do that in a number of ways. The biggest, of course, is through providing balanced, credible local journalism from teams of editors and reporters who live in and who are entrenched in those communities. Why do you think local journalism is so critical?
Well, it's always been, because it goes right back to the beginning of people telling one another stories about what was going on the street. You used to have the town crier going around and doing the headlines to people. So news is really quite a basic function in our lives. It's telling people about what's going on in their neighborhood, in their cities and towns, and right across the world. And villages, the Village Voice, and your own operation become extremely important because you're right there on the ground, giving people the information they need to live day by day. And unfortunately, over the last several years, because of the big conglomerates that have been formed, a lot of the local services have dried up because they can't afford to compete. Or if they are competing, they're competing with one little column in a big newspaper. So that's unfortunate. And it's great to see that so many of these other operations are cropping up to serve those audiences that are left behind in these situations because of the evolution of the industry.
Through your career, you have covered or reported on some of the biggest events of our time: Expo 67, the moon landing, the Quebec referendums, countless federal elections, royal weddings and funerals, of course, most recently that of the Duke of Edinburgh, and of course the attacks on 9/11. You've always said that you've had a front row seat to history. Is there one or two things that stand out to you as being significant that you got to witness firsthand?
Well, I think two things, because they're kind of at the bookends of my career. One was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and the other one was 9/11 in September 2001. And those two shattered people's perceptions of what was going on in the world, because we never thought that we'd see live on TV, almost live on TV, the assassination of a president. And on 9/11, a total shock. Out of the blue came those planes hitting the towers. And both had a considerable effect in kind of moving public consciousness right after those two events. In 1963, it was a matter of the rest of the world realizing that the presidency was now this vulnerable. There had been assassinations before, but never one that was so public, never one that had the kind of international response that the Kennedy assassination had. I mean, even the president of the old Soviet Union at the time commented on the fact that he liked John Kennedy. This was felt around the world, everywhere, and for a long time after that, there were things that indicated that he sacrificed in many ways his life in order for things to move forward on the American scene. Like that's after his death, all the civil rights legislation was passed in the United States in 64, 65. Martin Luther King, who was assassinated later. But all of that happened in the window of that period. At 9/11, it was entirely different, but a mass reaction around the world at the same time, because we had then all the security checkpoints set up at airports, all of the security systems that we have in place now, many of them originated right after 9/11. So these were two events that changed society. Now on the national scene, certainly in my view, 67 was huge, because that was the country coming out of itself, coming into its own, as it were, recognizing that, hey, we're big boys and girls now. We're on the national stage, on the international stage, and we've made our point to the world. In 1995, the referendum, big challenge, very close shave that night for Canada as a country, and we came through it. So we've had these moments where, we define ourselves by those times. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to live through so many of them.
You're You're a three-time Gemini Award winner for Best Host, Anchor, and Interviewer. You've got a star on Canada's Walk of Fame, but I suspect the award that you're most proud of, because I know how proud you are to be Canadian, would be the Order of Canada that you were awarded back in 1998. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that might be the Order of Canada pin on your lapel.
That's right. Scott, I never put much stock in awards, believe me. I think they're nice to have, but I don't worry about getting them or not getting them. But the Order of Canada is indeed something special. That's the one that really matters to me, because I've spent so much time covering this country. You know, when I joined the CBC, it was a great learning process for me, because I had a chance to go across the country, get to understand the regional idiosyncrasies of Canada, the east, the west, the north, the south. And I also got to meet a lot of people and really understand on the ground what the issues were, what the problems were, how we had to meld these various parts together in order to make it a country. And I've always said that when kids come to me and say, you know, why do you like journalism so much? What is it about broadcast journalism that attracted you? And I said, well, you know, I think from my point of view, it's learning how the world works. That's what I really appreciate about having been a frontline journalist all of these years. And that's something that I carry with me all the time, just that basic appreciation.
As someone, Lloyd, who is so clearly proud to be from Canada, have you ever seen a country so divided in what it means to be Canadian?
We've never really figured that out, have we? And I think it's because we figured it out more over the last 10, 15 years than we ever have, because we are really a polyglot of a lot of different cultures. And we had to resign ourselves to the fact that this was a country that we were going to share with another culture, another big culture, the French. So we've had to accommodate those two. And I think that taught us that if we can accommodate with French, with all the battles that England and France have had over the years, and they were our ancestors, you know, if we can accommodate those two, then certainly we can bring in all these other cultures and allow them to be part of our mosaic as well. So I think that's taught us that under the banner of Canada, under this wonderful Maple Leaf banner, we can be a lot of things. And we've got our own values now. We have our own value system by which we live. And I think we can be very proud of that, because we've established that through experiences over a long period of time.
Do you miss it, Lloyd? Do you miss the daily rush of putting a newscast together and breaking news and getting behind the desk and telling the stories to Canadians? Do you miss that?
I'll tell you, Scott, for a very long time, I certainly did. I wanted to get out there and get on that horsey game. But, you know, there comes a time. I was 77 years old, after all, when I stopped doing the nightly news. And that was, I was the oldest anchor anywhere at that point. Probably the oldest anchor who'd ever been at that point. But it was time, and it was time to move on. It was time for someone else to take the chair. But I continued doing W5 for 5 years beyond that. And then when I finished W5 at the age of 82, I guess it was, 83, I kept going, doing little bits and pieces of things for people, including, as you mentioned much earlier, commentary on the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral in April of last year. So I'm there to help out where needed, and I enjoy being called out once in a while for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you've got kids and grandkids, but how do you occupy your time these days?
Well, since COVID, like everybody else, we're pretty well grounded. But Nancy and I have had a lot of opportunity to spend time together, because when I was working 41 years every night, on weeknights, Monday to Friday, all that time, we had to shape our lives around that work schedule, and it was tough sometimes. Now we have much more freedom. We can go out, go places. As I say, it's been difficult during COVID, but because we've all had to adjust to that. So I have been less busy, but I've spent a lot of time reading and catching up with grandkids and that kind of thing. So I'm just enjoying this part of my life, and I hope that it'll last for a while. You never know, but there you are.
Yeah, you're right. We never know, and we're certainly blessed that you've certainly been a part of so many lives for as long as you have. Lloyd, I can tell you the kind of day it's been, and for me it's been a pretty good one because I got to sit down with you. It's been a real joy doing this. Thanks for doing this today.
Scott, it has indeed been a pleasure, and thank you.
And thank you for watching Up Close and Personal. For Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith.